Okay, welcome. It's nice to meet y'all. Uh, and let's get into it. I'm Kyle. Katrine already introduced me, so I don't think you need too much with that. So, um, presentation is agility over agile frameworks. It's framing I've come up with recently, but I've been kind of chasing the idea for a long time. Let's take a quick look at that one and see if we can make sense of this. So here is my core thesis. It's the one that I've been arguing around a lot for at least a decade. Essentially, the claim is Agile doesn't mean better. Agile has a fairly specific meaning. It's a word in English. It means able to turn quickly and easily. And able to turn quickly and easily is a way that you can be. That doesn't make it better all of the time. It's not worse all of the time. Of course, most of us pursuing Agile tend to think that able to turn quickly and easily is better. But what I'm here to try and talk about is Agile is about the ability to turn quickly and easily. It is not just generic betterness. As an example from back in 2000 era when we were just getting started with this stuff, there were a lot of methods for how to go about writing good code. For instance, we knew that NASA had the capability to write 5 million lines of code to go onto the space shuttle and send the space shuttle into orbit with basically zero failure in 5 million lines of code. And that was a good way of doing things. It wasn't fast, it wasn't cheap, but it was a way of doing things that was effective. Agile isn't doing things that way, even though it is an effective, useful way of doing things. The thesis for this entire talk is Agile doesn't mean better. Agile means, well, Agile. And what I'd like to argue is that we should pay attention to agility, and that a lot of us have gotten distracted into either paying attention to Scrum instead of agility, or paying attention to safe instead of agility, or paying attention to DevOps instead of agility, when what we should really be chasing is the goal of agility. Yeah. So, real quick, further points on the thesis. There are different problems with different solutions, right? If you want the fastest land vehicle on Earth, then, except for the fact that there's a new one being worked on right now, I don't actually know the state of it, but we have a car, the Thrust 2, I believe it's called, and the Thrust 2 goes really, really fast. If you put it on the Utah Salt Flats and light the jet engines on the side, then this car will cross the sound barrier, right? It is a very, very fast car. Right? If you want a land vehicle that can pull stuff, move stuff, carry stuff, then one of these 3-story dump trucks is a really powerful way to move and carry things. It has a great deal of power, but it doesn't go as fast as the rocket car. Similarly, the rocket car can't carry half a mountain, whereas the dump truck can. So different goals, different values. Similarly, if you want to drive fast and turn, you don't use the dump truck, you don't use the rocket car. Rocket car is really good at going fast in a straight line. But if you actually want to turn when the road turns, then you probably don't want a rocket car. You want a high-speed sports car. I believe this is a Venom or something like that. The issue is we have different tools and different techniques for different values. Speed is a value, power, coordination, etc. That's a value. Agility is a value. Each of these three is a worthwhile value, but the trick is you don't get all three of them. If you optimize for speed, let's optimize for speed, right? If you optimize for power, let's optimize for power. If you optimize for ability to turn effectively, high performance car, you can do that too, but they're not the same thing. I'm here to talk about agility, partly because it's called the Agile Manifesto and they didn't pick that name on accident. Agile was targeting the ability to turn effectively, to move, to change directions quickly and easily. If you look at the history of what actually happened, they actually had a debate about what to call it. Some folks wanted to call it adaptive, right? But Jim Highsmith already had the name adaptive. So you couldn't really get away with calling it adaptive when that was already a branded method at the time. Other folks wanted to call it what it was called. This group of methods had a name before we showed up to the Agile Manifesto. They were called the lightweight methods. Methods that basically tended to remove process and allow people to move and get stuff done instead of doing lots of documentation and lots of process. However, a lot of folks thought that the lightweight term would mean lightweight, like you can only drink one beer before you're drunk. And so they thought that that meant, hey, you're not actually very serious, you're a lightweight. And so we skipped adaptive and lightweight, which were the two prior suggestions, and went with agility. If you notice, all three of them point in a similar direction, right? They are things where it's not hard to turn. So, question is, where do we start? When you talk about agility, a lot of folks will say, hey, we start from the methods. Agile came from XP and Scrum and Crystal and Adaptive and such. That's where the Agile Manifesto came from. Should we start from listing the methods? Other folks say, hey, let's start from the manifesto. An awful lot of folks in the modern world say, let's start from the mindset point of view. Let's start from a framework. Let's start from the practices. I've been known to argue that XP actually starts with practices and patterns, and the values and principles are kind of secondary if you look at the history and how people thought about it and how it came about, right? There's a lot of different choices on where to start with the topic of agility. I would like to propose that in general, it's best to start with a problem, right? If you're going to address any problem whatsoever, getting clarity on what problem we're having is central to, I don't know, understanding the problem. So let's start with problems. Once I have some problems, let's talk about some generic principles for how to approach agility. Once I've got some principles around agility, then let's look at the question of domains in which we can apply Agile. And once I have those three, then I have room to look at solutions. Jumping way, way ahead to a conclusion. As I have been wandering around the country harassing people about doing things in a more agile fashion for kind of a lot of years, first XP class I taught was in 2000. As I've been doing this, I've seen a lot of cases where Agile fails to work. And I've come to a single conclusion. What is the biggest reason Agile fails to work? Well, it's pretty simple. I say, I have a hammer, I'm going to use the hammer instead of saying, I have a nail that needs pounded. You start from a solution, start from a framework, start from an approach, instead of starting from, here's the problem that I'm going to be addressing. And I think that this hammer is a good way of addressing the problem. It's a very different model, and it's where more than 50% of the Agile failure I've seen over 20 years is starting from the solution. Hey, let's use Scrum instead of starting from the problem. Okay, so what's your problem, right? If you have a problem of needing a large bed, then sitting in the small dog's bed may not solve your problem, right? But more accurately, it's not what's your problem, it's what's our problem. I have an acronym problem, right? My problem is I can't actually explain something unless I have an acronym for it. So I've come up with a bunch of acronyms to go ahead and help us along. And here are 3 acronyms that I'm going to use throughout the presentation. Puffed Pepper Quest, and I'm going to start with Quest. So here we go. The problem that we were facing, that Agile came about, and that we are trying to use agility as a solution to. I've got 5 parts to the problem to talk about. Part number 1 is quality. Turns out a lot of software is of poor quality, and I don't mean it has a lot of bugs. I mean a different side of quality, and we need to talk about that. Problem number 2 is I can make predictions all day long, predictions, estimates, etc., but most of them end up being wrong because the things I'm trying to predict aren't actually able to be predicted precisely across time. Number 3, we have an economics problem in software, and we're going to talk about that. Problem number 4, one of the biggest problems is I don't know what the users need, and the users don't know what the users need, and we have to figure it out. And then problem number 5 is, in order to do this effectively, I need people, and I need people who have experience and domain experience, and it ends up being pretty easy to mess up the teams that can successfully solve the problems. We know that IT tenure is maybe lower than it is in some other industries. So let's take a quick look at the problems. Hope to take a few minutes here. Problem number 1 is quality. What do I mean by quality? Well, really simply, I've been around the country, the world, a little bit doing Agile stuff, and I've been in software for a long time. Once upon a time, maybe 10 years ago or so, I was wandering about in an insurance company, and somebody said, "Hey, Kyle, we're about to start a project." I said, "Cool, what kind of project are you starting?" They said, "Oh, we're starting a project where we are going to provide a discount for our insurance to veterans on Veterans Day." I said, "Good idea, right? Discount for veterans on Veterans Day, great." And then they said, "Yeah, now we need to estimate the project." I said, "Okay, great. You start looking at your estimate. I'll do some back of the envelope calculations and see what I think it should take." So I've been in software for a long time. I look at the estimate. I go, okay, well, this thing, I think we're going to need to fix this controller over here, and then we're going to need to change the domain model a little bit. We're going to need to add a field over here. It looks like there's a couple tables over here that need to be handled. Okay, me and a tester, I can do it in a week. 2 weeks, let's be safe, right? Me and a tester, 2 weeks, 10K, right? I was a little less senior back then, but 2 weeks to do this. That's my estimate. Okay, cool. That's Kyle's estimate. 2 weeks, $10,000. A couple minutes later, or a couple weeks later, it took them 2 weeks to come back. They came back and said, okay, we have our estimate. So we're already in a place where they took 2 weeks to make an estimate that I thought could be done in 2 weeks, and that bothered me a little bit. They said, yeah, we'll take a team and we'll take a quarter. It'll cost $250,000 to do this. So I'm looking at my estimate. My estimate was, if we remember, $10,000 in 2 weeks, and their estimate's $250,000 and 13 weeks. And I'm going, those numbers don't line up very well. Okay, I'm an agilist. I make mistakes, right? I believe that human beings make mistakes, and so I could be wrong. Why don't I talk to somebody who's smarter than me, maybe? So I wandered off, and I got some friends out in Silicon Valley, and everybody in Silicon Valley does advertising. I mean, Facebook's an advertising group, Google's an advertising group, right? So I go talk to one of my advertising guys in Silicon Valley and say, hey, quick question. Do you do rate codes? They say, yeah, we got rate codes, right? Different advertisement stuff has different rates. Great. So I was just talking to my buddies at a company, and we're trying to do a discount. And so I'm trying to set up a discount for veterans on Veterans Day. And they said, oh, really? We just finished that. I said, oh, wonderful. So I don't have to set up the whole problem. You know this problem. Yeah. And just to make sure we're doing insurance and you're doing advertising, we have to handle 50 states worth of regulations. You have to handle 200 countries worth of regulations. So, I mean, you're a highly regulated industry here. Okay, fine. So I'm not too worried about the problem being a lot harder. Great. How hard was it? I mean, I know there's a lot of secrecy. You're in Silicon Valley, so you can't tell us exactly, but how long did it take? Oh no, this one's not a problem. And I don't have to look anything up because I did it. Oh, you did? Great, so how long did it take you? An hour. You did adding a rate code for veterans on Veterans Day in an hour? Yeah. It wasn't that hard. Okay. So now I have a problem because I estimated it would take me a week and a second week for testing for safety, and would cost $10,000. This person, they're working for a large company in Silicon Valley. They did it in an hour, and that's an hour from request to production, right? And the insurance company said it would take $250,000 in a quarter. On real quick math, that says that some software is 1,000 times cheaper to change, 1,000 times faster to change than other software. If your actual concern is the ability to turn and change directions, it seems to me that the fact that some software is atrociously hard to change and other software isn't seems to me a giant problem, a neon flashing sign in your bedroom saying, look, pay attention to this. If we're going to say, I want to solve a problem, then this is one of the problems that's up there screaming at you saying some software is 1,000 times harder to change than others. Since that time, I went looking because first I did a check. There's what I've checked, but maybe I'm wrong twice. Okay, so I went out and did some research. I found a paper out produced by some guy. It said that some teams are able to produce software at a rate 2,000 times faster than other teams. The guy who wrote that paper, some guy named Jeff Sutherland, I think, right? Um, and then, you know, I went out and looked and I talked to some buddies, and I found one of my buddies in the Netherlands who was talking to him, and he said, yeah, I had this, we built 3 systems at the same company, right? They all did basically the same thing, but we needed overlap. And the boss came to us and said, hey, I need to make change X to these 3 systems. And please, the 3 leaders, how much will it take? And leader number 1 says, did his counting. Okay, it's going to take me a month. And leader number 2 says, it's going to take me a month. And leader number 3 gets really nervous. He goes back and says, give me a minute. I have to go talk to my team. He goes back and talks to his team, comes back, quietly doubles the estimate and says, 30 minutes, right? 30 days versus 30 minutes. It's not like this 1000x number is just me once. I've got several stories like this. Some software is far, like 3 orders of magnitude harder to change than others. And the Agile people walking in trying to say, let's solve software problems knew that. That's one of the problems we were trying to solve with Agile, is some software is a lot harder to change. Problem number 2 is probably the most commonly discussed thing in Agile. I don't know how far I need to go into that. You've all seen this cartoon before, I'm sure, because you're looking at Agile. The problem is the plan goes from point A to point B. Reality says there's some problems between point A and point B that we're going to have to deal with. The actual path isn't a straight path. Right? We may have to take a zip line, we may have to take a boat, we may have to hike up a snowy mountain, right? There's lots of questions along the way going from A to B, and the ability to predict what it's going to take to get from A to B when B is a year out is a lot more brain power than I have. Right. That's why we do Kanban or Scrum in short cycles, because substantially I can't predict what it's going to take. The most famous thing here would be Steve McConnell's cone of uncertainty, suggesting that at project inception time, when you write the project charter, hey, here's something we want to do. Your ability to estimate accurately is in a plus or minus 400% level, right? And when you are finished with dev and testing, then you're down to a plus or minus 10 or 25% level, because a lot of the time we're not actually done. Those things are major topics. When we were building Agile, these were one of the topics that was really worrying to us. This is one of project management's favorite diagrams. Agile borrowed it. The basic notion is the amount of software you produce is a function of 3 things. How much energy you put into the quality of the software, how much you spend per unit of time, and how long you take, right? Essentially, how many people are you throwing at the problem? How long do you have? And how serious are you about quality? If you want the quality to be higher, you produce less in a given time. If you want the quality to be, if you want to get stuff done faster, you cut the quality checks, right? Like we skip the testing phase or something, right? Not that any of us have ever done that, but that happens. One of the major results of this pyramid, once you take it seriously, is that almost every time we make a bad prediction about how long something's going to take in software, we say, oh, Well, it's going to take 6 months. And then we allocate the right amount of money, we allocate an amount of time, and we predict that we're going to produce the right amount of software. Well, it turns out that the problem was harder. You need to produce more software than that to solve the problem. And so what do? We skip the quality. And so an awful lot of the time, the economics of software ends up cutting quality, making worse software in a given amount of time for a given amount of money. And if time and money are fixed, then quality drops. I'm sure we've all heard about that, but this is one of the problems we were running into in software is you actually have to balance quality, time, money, and the amount of software being produced. And Agile, I think one of the most interesting things Agile brought to the table was the notion that if this is your problem, then the amount of software you produce is what should flex most. Problem number 4 that we ran into when starting off with Agile. I don't know what the user needs. When we go out and talk to the users and write down what they say they need, we find out that they don't know either. Not only are we running into the weird case of Henry Ford saying, if I asked my customers what they wanted, they would say they wanted a faster horse, right? But I don't know what they want either. I'm going to build them a black car. The customer can have any color they want so long as it's black, says Mr. Ford. But we found out a few years later that once you started offering different colors of cars, the customers cared, right? And so Henry Ford was offering them a car, which was much better than a horse for them. But the lack of ability to deliver colors is some chunk of why Ford did not stay the leader of auto manufacturing for the next forever. The person building the code is frequently an engineer. They are not building the code for themselves, they are building it for a customer. They don't know what the customer needs. The customer is not an engineer. They don't know what software can do. So the customer doesn't know what the best solution is. The only way you get a good solution from software is you try to build something, you show it to the customers, you find out what problems they have, and you try something else. The notion that I can collect requirements up front and be successful is one of the giant problems Agile was trying to address. If you collect your requirements and then you try and deliver the requirements, we don't basically ever deliver what the customer needs. We deliver what's in the requirements document, which may have something to do with what the customer needs. And I'm checking the comments. Companies may roll their eyes when they hear this, but it is I mean, to a significant extent, I'm inclined to say the biggest single problem in software is delivering software somebody wants, right? I was last week when I delivered this discussion, I would talk about pets.com. $400 million of investment, and it lasted for like 3 weeks before the site shut down because nobody wanted it. But now we have a better example. Is it called Quibi? How do you say that word? I don't actually know. But that was like a $2 billion investment in something people didn't want, right? Actually building the right product is what makes software useful. Building the wrong product is what everybody else does. And then the final problem is there's an awful lot of knowledge contained in individuals in our teams. The cost of turnover in IT is rather enormous. I haven't actually been in a lot of other industries, so I can't tell you what the cost of turnover is in other industries. But in IT, my memory says that if a senior person leaves, it takes multiple years before a replacement is up to speed, right? And so this whole business of actually keeping a team around, keeping a group of people happy so that we keep the knowledge in the company, this is an enormous problem. Also, just as a side note that isn't thoroughly a side note, I don't know about everybody else. I got into software because software is the only place I know where somebody will pay me to solve puzzles, right? I like solving hard problems that help people, right? And so when I had a math degree and I could solve problems in, I don't know, number theory and graph theory and game theory and differential equations and all of my fun areas of math, but it didn't feel to me like I was generically helping people in general. And so software is like the place where people who like to solve complicated problems go if the complicated problems are algorithmic type problems. Like, I don't know, my kid has a bunch of Rubik's Cubes, and I think those are fun too. If you're not providing an environment that makes the team happy, team members leave, and this is a huge problem. And in a lot of companies that I've been in, it's an even bigger problem because this little orange dude who's leaving is the only person who's ever worked on 2 of the 12 systems in the company, right? And so when this person leaves, if anything goes wrong with that system, it may be 3 months before we can fix it because nobody else actually knows this stuff. So big problems, right? Once again, quality problem, the unpredictability problem, the economics problem, the scope problem, and the team problem are the problems that we were facing when we got to Agile, right? There were other people trying to solve other problems, right? But those of us trying to write code in the mid-late 90s were faced with these. I'll argue at points that things like unpredictability came up, and scope topics came up bigger when we found that users had opinions. Back when we were dealing with command line software and users didn't use the software until they got trained, right? If I get 3 days to train people on how to use the software I wrote, then a lot of the time I can push them to solving problems my way instead of solving problems the way they want to solve them. And so a lot of the scope problems didn't exist before, I don't know, really the Mac in 85, right? And most people didn't use a Mac, so it was Windows 95 that really brought it up, and then the internet. So a lot of these problems were relatively new. There weren't a lot of big software teams. There wasn't a lot of market for building software before, I don't know, Bill Gates invented software patents. Right? Bunch of these problems existed, and then the quality problem exists when, well, different topic. We'll go there. Quality, unpredictability, economic scope, and maintaining your teams. those are giant problems, and Agile was trying to solve these. And so I'm interested in question of, if these are actually the problems we're facing, how do you address them? So I have more acronyms. For what it's worth, you can do question and answer. I don't know, Katrine may change this. I find some of these things to be more interesting if we actually discuss it along the way. Listening to me talk all of the time isn't as much fun for me as having some discussions when people notice or want to think about something. I see you're commenting in chat. I appreciate that. Voice doesn't bother me. So suppose we have these problems. How do you address these problems, right? Well, the generic answer to the problem was, I'm going to pursue agility. I'm going to pursue the ability to change directions effectively, right? And then when we find out that the user was wrong about what they wanted, right? Then we can turn and go in the direction they actually want to go rather than the direction they asked us to go. Okay, fine. So agility is our direction, but how do you actually get agility, right? What principles lead us towards agility? And I once upon a time spent a bunch of time doing philosophy, and I've argued that the manifesto has a bunch of, here's some things we've done in the past, but I don't know that they really fall, and I should call them principles, even though that's what they're listed as in the manifesto. That said, I want to see if we can back up and say, hey, are there principles that live under what the manifesto calls principles? And I've got a list. I'm not going to claim right now that it's an exhaustive list, but I've been fighting with this problem for a decade, since Agile became more popular. And here's my list right now. Problem number one, or solution, principle, direction number one, is progress. If you're going to say, how do you deal with adaptability? How do you deal with being able to change? The first thing we need is the principle that, look, I'm not trying to get to an end state. I'm not trying to say, when I get here, I'm done. I'm trying to be in a situation where I, as a team, am getting better. What I really want to say is, for any month in the past year or the next year, I expect the first month to be worse than the second month. Progress says that as a team, as an organization, as a product, we're getting better. We're not trying to reach a goal. We are trying to improve. The best statement of this that I've run into came from Toyota. And the line basically goes, look, what we're seeking is zero waste, where waste is motion that doesn't add to the value of the product at the end, right? Meetings, including the stand-up, count as waste, right? Because they are time spent not moving the stuff towards being finished. If we were better, if we were telepathic, then I wouldn't need the stand-up, right? The stand-up is a tool I use to be more effective. What I'm seeking is a way that I don't need that. Toyota says, we are seeking zero waste. We don't know whether that's even an achievable goal, but that doesn't stop us from seeking it. We have a direction and we're headed that way. Agility, if you're going to chase adaptability and ability to respond to change, you have to be trying to get better, not trying to get to a certain point, right? Progress is one of the fundamental positions from agility. And so, as an example, I run stand-ups, and a lot of the times I'll run the stand-up for the first month or two using a standard 3-question stand-up, right? And once people have figured out that we can do a stand-up, then I may introduce another question. Hey, who do I need to talk to after the meeting so I don't keep everybody else around, right? And so I'll introduce question number 4. And then sometimes teams, I don't know that any of you have ever seen this, except I'm sure everybody has, where the team likes to report, make a progress report, right? And they do stand up as a progress report instead of as a coordination activity, right? That happens to us in this industry a lot. Hey, here's what I did yesterday. Today, well, I'm not really sure what I'm going to do, and no blockers. Great. When I have stand-ups go like that, I recommend as a team that we stop reporting on yesterday. We only talk about what we're going to do this coming day, because the stand-up is supposed to be targeting coordination, not reporting. Okay, so I shift the stand-up to go with the needs. A lot of the time, 6 or 9 months in, we're not doing anything that even resembles the standard 3 questions. The team is going, here's what we need to do to work together effectively. And we're changing it. I haven't had a stable task board on one of my teams for years, right? They changed the task board to solve the problem they're really facing weekly, because the task board is there to support the team, not the other way around, right? And so to be effective, a team should change the task board if it's not solving their needs, right? And as they go about understanding the problems they're really facing and what wait states they need to see, that's what happens. Progress, the team that changed it every month, I worked with them for a year and a half. And yes, it slowed down over time, but we were still seeing for the first few months, we would see the chessboard change multiple times a week as we tried to understand the process. As we got better and improved our process and improved our technical skills and improved our DevOpsy techniques and improved our pairing and improved our how well we wrote code, we would change the actual process we did. And I mean, by the end, it wasn't changing too often, but I'd come back after a few weeks and I'd go, wait, that's not how the task board looked last time I saw it, right? Because they kept changing it. Yeah, year and a half of still tinkering with it as it was getting better. I mean, maybe if you had a 5-year team. There was, we had almost no member change on that team, right? We added members, and we added members via team interviews where the team did the interview, and I had, as a leader, had really nothing to do with the process. I showed them how to do a team interview, find out if the people would work well at that organization and with them. And they did all of the interviewing and deciding, and I would whisper in the back with other managers, here's who I bet they're going to pick. So, yeah, we had one major point of turnover. A lead developer left as we transitioned towards pairing because the rest of the team was strongly opinionated that this person could not respect the junior developers, right? And if you're going to do social programming, respect is central to making it work. And if I'm pairing, there's only one person whose face I see and I see the name. If I'm pairing while coding with MC, and I have my 20 years of Java programming, and MC may not be 20 years into Java, and he says, hey, I think we should do this, and my answer is, that's stupid, we're going to do it my way. That doesn't really work for social programming. It doesn't work at all for social programming. And at some point, and the team would rather not have that person on the team because it breaks the social cohesion of the team. That was the only departure we had early on. Yes, it is a large challenge. Very simply, there's one answer to social programming. There's one answer to turnover, and the turnover that I have run into, the only answer I've ever seen that works for it is social programming. If I pair or mob with people, I can handle turnover. And if I don't, then when somebody leaves, they take knowledge and it takes me forever to recover. I mean, not like departures don't hurt anyway, but if the departure happens and the person is the only person who knew this, then it's really a problem. To a significant extent, chasing team happiness topics goes a long way towards that, unless they're involuntary departures, which is a different question. Problem number one, solution number one was progress. Solution number two is us theory. Us theory is an invented word by me. And the theory basically goes, who is going to solve the problem? Should I solve the problem? Should I say, hey, you solve the problem? Should I say, they need to solve my problem? Or should we solve the problem? To a significant extent, the harder the problem and the more important the problem, the more important it is for us to solve the problem together. One, it builds shared knowledge. Two, it builds, sorry, I lost my words. Besides building shared knowledge, it also builds a cohesiveness in the team that matters a lot. But on top of that, it's a stance towards how problems get solved, right? Insofar as you have a world in which your theory is that you should do the work and it's not my problem, right? Insofar as I have a theory that says, I'm going to do the work, stay out of my way, right? That is damaging the team. It is making us less teamy, and it's lacking knowledge sharing. There are cases where us is not the right solution, and I'm not going to argue that point. I will say that if you want maximized ability to turn, then us as a solution is a major point of getting things done. Principle number 3, focus. Focus is really simple. Don't work on 17 different things. Right? If I have 10 stories on my to-do list, I should work on one of them, right? The more interesting things I've been seeing over from a social point of view are, if we have 10 stories to work on and there's 10 of us on the team, then how many stories should we be working on? Well, the answers that are less than 10 are the interesting ones. Hey, Maybe we as a team of 10 only work on 5 stories. Maybe we as a team of 10 only work on 2 stories, right? Those are the interesting solutions that have come up. But overall, this is broader than that. If there are 10 stories, one of those stories is more important than the other ones, right? Pareto Principle says that in 18th century, 17th century Italy, one that 20% of the people owned 80% of the land. Fortunately, that's changed, and in America, 20% of the people own 80% of the land. And in socialist Sweden, it's different. So 20% of the people own 80% of the land. And in communist China, same joke, right? Right? The fact is, some things are not evenly distributed. Some things are a lot more important than other things, right? In software, I have never seen a list of 10 items. Let's be careful. If I see a list of 20 features to deliver for a software project, 4 of those 20 features constitute 80% of the value, right? 20% of the features constitute 80% of the value in software projects too. Paying attention to the fact that some things are more important than others, and paying attention to the fact that if I'm focused on one thing, I can get it done. And if I'm spreading my attention to 6 things, I don't get any of them done. If you pay attention to both of those ideas, which is they both fit under the word focus, then we go a long way towards solving a lot of problems. A huge chunk of, for instance, backing up a sec, a huge chunk of my economics problem in software comes down to the theory that I think all of the features are important, right? They're not. We all know they're not. Everybody in software knows they're not. And yet we keep acting like they are. And a big chunk of the solution is focus. Work on the most important things first and take seriously that some things are more important than others. When I was young and stupid in Agile, right, 10, 12, 15 years ago, if you said, hey, what is Agile? I used to say, oh, Agile's a theory of feedback systems, right? That's all you really need to understand Agile is. Agile is a set of nested feedback systems such that we find out faster when things are wrong and we change them, right? The central feedback system in Scrum is the bi-weekly sprint review. Every 2 weeks, we go to our customer and say, this is what we built. How wrong are we? Right? And they tell us, oh, well, that's not exactly what I wanted. It's kind of what I wanted. Here's what I need to change. And then I don't throw away 6 months of work. I throw away a week of work. That's the center of Scrum. And if we don't like just that feedback loop, then we have a retrospective to say, what process are we doing? And how do we do feedback on the process to make the process better, right? And if that's not enough feedback loops, then we have a daily stand-up. And our daily stand-up is a feedback on how we're doing getting the stuff done every day, right? It's an inspect and adapt. And if Scrum's not enough, then I have a DevOps pipeline, and my DevOps pipeline runs the tests every time I check code in. That can be hourly, right? You can check code in every hour and check to make sure there's nothing wrong with the code according to everything I've written down so far. Is that not good enough? Okay, I've got unit tests. Unit tests are things that I run every 5 minutes, maybe more often than that. And so if I'm doing unit testing as a TDD style unit testing, not just unit tests in general, but if I'm doing TDD, then I've got a 5-minute feedback cycle going on in terms of checking whether the code's right. And if that's not good enough, well, we can do pairing. And pairing is a second level feedback system where if I type something wrong and I'm paired with Katrine, Katrine tells me that I'm wrong. Right? And so there's all of these magnificent feedback systems. And at one point, a buddy of mine and I, a couple buddies of mine and I sat down and wrote down 100 distinct feedback systems that we tend to like to use in how we're getting feedback from where and the paths and how we try to correct it. So, excellent. Wow, more questions. I'm gonna try and address some of these in the pause. In the retro, my personal experience is if we know the goal of a retro is twofold. The first part of a retro, we are trying to get a temperature check on the team. A temperature check saying, hey, this week was good for me. Does everybody think the same as me, or did somebody think this week sucked? Right? That's a really important part of the retro. So the first part of the retro is, hey, how is everybody doing? And the second part of the retro is, what should we change for our next cycle? Right? That's the two parts of the retro, right? Or at least my understanding of the purpose of the retrospective is become aware of how we are and propose something that we can try for the next time to see if we can get better. Remember, I'm pretty serious about the progress thing, right? And the retro is the built-in progress technique for the Agile method. So that's my goal. I've had people do different retros for me, right? The most notable one I remember was the ship, what's pushing us forward through the sails and what's pulling us back as an anchor, and that one. But I mean, I've run the same retro for several years, and I've had the Scrum Master run the same retro for several years with the team where I don't have a specific thing. The team I trust to say, no, how are things going? Let's actually look at it. And how are things, and what should we try changing? And sometimes you get things like, hey, you know what I really want to try changing? I want us to go out to lunch once a week, right? Okay. And sometimes I get, hey, you keep talking about that TDD thing. I think we should try it, right? And like, I get out of the way of retros as fast as I can. This is for the team to figure out what's going right and what's going wrong. It sometimes takes a few months before the team engages in the retro. I'll give you that. Right? Sometimes teams don't engage in the retro. Sometimes management shuts down the effectiveness of the retro. Sometimes you're not able to make any of the changes. Sometimes the team just wants to talk about what's wrong with the other guys and doesn't want to talk about themselves at all or what they can do. Right? Those are all issues. But my historical pattern in retros is that I present, here is a technique that I use, here is the purpose, and then I get out of the way. More specifically, y'all may not know, I wrote a book on the topic of ceremony and the design of ceremony, right? You can look it up. It's by Aretae and Malash. It's a cheap Kindle book. Wherein I basically focus on the notion that ceremonies exist to provide social habits and train us into behaviors. But the single most important thing about making a ceremony work is that it is emotionally engaging. If you don't have something that captures the humanity, the emotion of the participants, then as soon as you turn around, they're going to stop doing it. Right? And so what I need is the ability to design ceremonies and update ceremonies until the team gets emotionally involved with the ceremony and they walk out of these ceremonies having encountered, having participated emotionally, and the ceremony provides value to the organization. And if I'm doing both of those, then I just get out of the way, right? We've got a habit, it's providing emotional value to the participants and it's providing value to the organization. I get out of the way. And if it's not doing that, then I harass the members at the end of every ceremony I do, whether it be a stand-up or a retro. I like to ask questions. These questions are in my book, but you don't need to buy the book to get them. The questions are, did this ceremony accomplish its job? What were we trying to do with the ceremony? What was the goal? What was the value proposition? And did we do it? Right? A stand-up's value proposition is synchronization. I am trying to synchronize with my team so that we can be more effective today. That's the purpose of stand-up. Great. So at the end of stand-up, I say, hey, everybody remember what the purpose is? Did we do it? Question 2, was it worth the time we spent? Time, money, whatever. Was it worth what we spent on it? Right? In the case of a stand-up, 15 minutes, 8 people, sounds to me like that was, I can't count, 2 hours of time, 2 hours of person time spent. Was that worth 2 hours of our week to do that amount of synchronization collectively? Yes, I mean, we should really take that seriously. And then question 3 is, how energized are you? As we're leaving the ceremony, how are you feeling? Right? At the end of some days, if I do a sprint review at the end of the day, a lot of the times at the end of a day on Friday, people will go, yeah, I'm drained. What that tells me is that if I stop making them do it, they'll skip it. Maybe not the first time, but the 5th time. And so what I'm trying to do is build a set of, my new word for it is seams after genes and memes, a self-sustaining, self-replicating set of ceremonies that will persist because they are valued by the participants. And so I spend a lot of time on my ceremonies trying to make sure they are actually valuable to the participants. And so I don't run into most of the problems that I hear about in retros where we have to try all these different things. I say, okay, here's what I'm doing. Is it providing the value? What can we change to make it provide the value? Right? I articulate the value proposition straight up and I say, are we doing it? Is it worth the time? And how are you feeling at the end of it? And if those don't answer well, if I do fist to 5 for the questions, right? And if they don't answer well, we start fixing, okay, great. So great, this ceremony isn't working. How do we fix it? How do we achieve this value for good time and make it worthwhile for this team? Very long answer to your question, Dombadi. I don't know if that's how I say your name or you want me to. If you want to follow up, that's okay.
I think we're okay for now. Thank you.
Certainly. Good question. I mean, it's a topic I like. Angel, how does Agile work in infrastructure and service management environment? So, a lot of the times people try to fit Agile frameworks on, and I've run into a lot of people who have trouble. Like fitting Scrum into service management tends to just make everybody angry, right? because Scrum is a fixed service. If you have service tickets that tend to sit around for a month, then you can predict what you're going to do for 2 weeks. If you don't have service tickets that sit around for 3 or 4 or 5 weeks and you need to solve them when they come in, then doing the kind of time-boxed predictability that we have in Scrum doesn't actually address the problems you're really facing, right? And so most people in a service management approach tend not to succeed by using Scrum. They tend to move in a Kanban direction instead. This is what happens in my experience in the industry. Having said that, I would like to suggest that whereas you might wish to start with something like Kanban, I've recently said frameworks are nice like trellises for grapes. They help your agile vine grow in the direction you would like it to grow in. But the trellis isn't the vine. The vine, it goes kind of in weird directions a lot of the time, and the trellis is support for it. And so I would strongly recommend that you take principle seriously. Hey, are you addressing these problems? Are you addressing quality? In infrastructure, the big problems for me are builds take a long time, and it worked on my machine, right? Those are the giant problems I run into in infrastructure. And so my question is, how do I start solving the problems for real? And DevOps has a bunch of fancy words, but the answers come down to, hey, I want to make it easier to do deployments, and I want to make our checks more automated, right? And I really, really don't want to use specific physical machines that aren't auto-configured, because if I touch configuration, then somebody else is going to touch the configuration, and then my stuff's going to break, right? So I'm not certain if I addressed your question, but I hope I was close. Right? I don't like walking in with a framework. I like walking in saying, what problems do we have and what solutions can I use? Progress, us theory, and focus is huge. I've seen the biggest problems I've seen in a lot of service management are insufficient attention to focus, right? Hey, are we working on the most important thing? Or did I pick up a ticket and I'm supposed to work on it till I'm done? Or I've got 7 tickets and I'm supposed to solve all of them. We don't have serious prioritization going on. I'm back on feedback. Feedback is what I used to say Agile was all about. These days, feedback is a part of Agile. If you don't have good feedback systems, if you're not doing feedback system design, I don't think you're taking the problem seriously, right? What are you building to find problems sooner and make the cycle time between problem identification and solution faster? That's a big chunk of what we're trying to do. A lot of those are built into some techniques, but a lot of times we're not taking the serious feedback centricity of it seriously. Something I think has been lost substantially along the way in Agile is a focus on excellence. I led off this with the notion that some software is 1,000 times cheaper to change than other software, right? Very simply, you have to pay attention to what everybody else poorly calls technical debt. You have to pay attention to your DevOps, your deployment cycles. You have to pay attention to your testing procedures. If you want software that is cheap to change, you can't copy paste from Stack Overflow and assume that's good enough. You actually have to make the software good, and good as an excellent software is a huge win to your total cost of ownership of your software. It's a huge win to the speed at which you can make changes. It is not a huge win to your costs of software next week, right? A focus on actually doing these things well, actually becoming better at them, a focus on strangely not just good enough, right? But good. A focus on excellence is one of the biggest things I have seen missing from most traditional discussions of agility. And so I'll jump outside of Agile for a minute. Who else chases agility? My buddy Lou Hayes pursues agility and adaptability in first responders, right? Firemen, policemen, people who need to have the ability to adapt to changes on the ground in unfamiliar situations. How do you do that? You train. You train your decision making, you practice, you get better at the little things so that when a big thing comes up, you can't make a mistake, right? My favorite basketball team ever was the beautiful game Spurs, right? What did they do? Well, they played together for 20 years, right? They knew each other and they knew how each other moved and they practiced the same plays for decades, right? And they got to a point where everybody knew how everybody else moved. And so Manu could do a no look behind the legs, between somebody else's legs pass because he knew exactly where Splitter was going to be, right? That's just the kind of thing they built. The pursuit of excellence via serious practice, via effort towards getting better at your craft makes a difference. And if you're not doing that, your ability to respond to change is limited, right? That's whether you're police or sports or software or wherever else you happen to be working in, right? I'll admit I grew up in XP, right? Which is a focus on technical excellence in software by means of using pairing and test-driven development. So I'm a bit biased on this point, but everywhere else I've looked, I see the same things. Excellence matters. And then my final principle is, in software, I like to talk about the ripple effect. You drop a stone in a pond, it makes a ripple. How far away does the ripple go, right? If you change right here, what else has to change in order to make it work? If you look through everything we've ever discovered about software and cost of change in software, it may be true that the absolute number one cost of change limiter on software is how decoupled is your system. If I make a change to this piece, how many other pieces have to change before it works again? Right? How small is that number is very simply, it is the overwhelming discussion in software architecture and theory across the last 40 years. Right? There is one topic, and the topic is, if I make a change here, does it break something over there? Right? Guess what? It applies to organizational systems too. If I want to make a change to my software, how many other teams do I have to get to sign off on it? Right? Do I need a requirements team to talk to the customer to figure out what's going on? Or does our team do that? Do I need a separate deployment team to deploy the code? Do I have a separate testing team to test the code? Right? Do I need to do some complicated integration because my stuff depends on your stuff? Every bit of that is a limiter on agility. I'm not saying it's bad. Remember, there's strong, there's fast, and there's agile, right? But every coupling you have between teams or between pieces of software decreases your agility. If you want agility, you have to seriously focus on coupling. It's why XP and why the DevOps people lead off with the notion of one team. Look, you don't go in this direction without saying, look, no, it's not my team and your team, it's our team. We have a team, we build software, we deploy software, we test software, us, not this team, that team, and the other team, because that just doesn't generally, it doesn't lead to agility. It may lead to other positive outcomes, but if you want agility, you're not getting there that way, right? Okay, once again, 6 principles. I believe from my experience that if you focus on these 6 principles, we are continuously getting better. When we solve problems, we solve it. Focus on the most important thing, not a bunch of other things. Build feedback systems to find and correct problems faster. Focus on excellence, not just getting something done. And decoupling in your systems, both software and organizationally, you move towards agility. And if you miss any of these, it's going to be a road bump, right? It's going to slow you down. It's going to make you less agile. And yes, it would take some work, but I can shoehorn most concerns around agility into one of these principles. So, one more. Besides those, there's also areas that I focus on in agility. And a lot of folks these days have tended to focus on only part of this and say, oh, we're going to be agile, and skip most of agility. And so I like to talk about the domains we have to pay attention to in agility as well. Agility has, different people will break it down differently. I just want to call out that there are different domains, right? This is how I've been breaking it down for the last 5 or 6 years now. Domain number 1 in agility. If I build the wrong product, it's not effective software, right? I have to build something that the customers want to use, or, well, they're not going to use it, right? I can't count the number of software projects that I've seen where we build a complete solution and the customer doesn't like it and does it the old way, right? And so our solution, whether that be a 50,000 or a $50 million software project, gets just ignored because it doesn't solve the needs the actual customers have. The simplest silly example is I have a bunch of people entering data onto COBOL green screens, and I build a much nicer, prettier web interface. But you know what matters most to the COBOL people entering stuff on the green screens? Speed of entry. Can I type and hit tab to shift between the fields? If I don't have the tab capability in my web page, nothing else that the screen does is worth the trade to those folks. Or at least I've seen large projects fail because of that point, right? Building a product that the customers actually need and changing the product when the customer's needs changed is the absolute most important thing in software. If you don't build something the customers will use, everything else you did right doesn't matter, right? The second thing, execution. Already said, I'm really loud about this. Some software is 1,000 times more expensive to change than other software. I've seen me measure it. I've seen other people measure it. Famous people in Agile have measured it, right? And I've checked it a bunch of times. This exists, and if you're not paying attention to it, you got to be paying attention to this. Probably reason number 4 on my it's in the top 5 reasons of why Agile fails. It's because after 9, 12, 18 months of building software quickly in a Scrum process, we've built a giant spaghetti mess that I can't make changes to, right? It's no longer able to make changes. I actually have to pay attention to the technical excellence, the execution side of doing software. How's my test automation? How's my build process? How is my decoupling? I have to pay attention to how I write the code. Or 18 months in to making changes to my software, I'm making a change, or I'm making 5 changes every 2 weeks. Every change to the software increases the cost of all future changes. And so if you stack enough of those, you end up in a case where you can no longer afford to make changes to software. And there's an awful lot of multi-million-dollar projects being started because nobody built software that was changeable. Execution matters tremendously to software. The people matter, right? I think more people in Agile are talking about the people side than anything else, or at least if you watch Agile on LinkedIn, right? You focus on the people side, and the best coaches I've seen in Agile are all people focused. They're very in tune with making sure the human side of Agile is handled. If you build the wrong product, it's not going to get you anywhere. Meatball bubblegum kind of isn't everybody's favorite. Getting the execution, doing those feedback systems that are occurring on the minute by minute and second by second basis matters. We have to work together. As human beings, solving problems together is what's going to work. If I can't get along with Katrine, then we don't have a presentation that we can do, right? If you're going to solve problems, you do them together. Also, a huge chunk of thinking, I make mistakes. Once upon a time in the past, I used to say about Agile, the core topic in Agile is that I make mistakes, and so does everybody else. And so in order to be effective as Agilists, we have to acknowledge we make mistakes. What's the best way to avoid mistakes? Well, 1, I've got feedback systems, and 2, I got other people helping catch my mistakes, right? That's what I got. There's a lot more to that. Making an effective team is substantially more effective than a low effectiveness team. The human side matters. It matters a lot. A lot of people focus just on this, and I don't encourage that, but a big chunk of Agile is the people side, and you've all heard a lot of people talking about that, I'm sure. By the way, there's also the process part, which everybody does talk about, right? This is what Scrum says. Scrum is a process framework. It's great. SAFe talks about enterprise process. Kanban is a process-focused thing. Crystal is a method for choosing between processes. The process side of Agile is a solid 15% of Agile. Just don't think it's the whole thing, right? Process Agile matters. So does the product side of Agile, the people side of Agile, the execution side of Agile, and the enterprise side of Agile. Hey, I have an idea. I need people to work together collaboratively to solve problems, because we'll solve problems together better, right? I think all of us in Agile agree with that. That's easy. Great. When are the people giving the promotions going to take that into account when they're giving promotions? Because I can say we're all supposed to work together until I'm blue in the face. But until the incentives line up with what I'm actually talking about, at best, some people will do what I'm asking them to do. At worst, nobody, right? You got to get promotions hooked up so that promotions are actually taking into account how effective you are at helping your team. Because otherwise, we're not going to do the people side of Agile. Your bonuses, who makes decisions on your bonuses? I remember doing a organization where we were going through Agile, and we spent 6 months focused on the human side of Agile. And then somebody said, hey, how much of our bonus depends on this? And the answer was 0. Right? None of your bonus, none of your promotion, none of your salary depends on you playing well with others. That's just words we're using. Okay, well, nobody's going to take it seriously, or happens a lot. How do you fund projects? I'm inclined to think that project-centric funding is a big mess for making decisions that are improving the total cost of ownership of a product, right? I'm inclined to care that when I hire people, I need to hire people who can work effectively with this team, right? And so I delegate hiring to my teams. Okay, right? How do you do change management if we're bringing stuff in, right? Change management is a huge problem. Most change efforts, and Agile is a change effort, most change efforts have giant problems. So are we handling those problems? That's another 15% of Agile. So Agile, we have a bunch of aspects. And then I already said this, but I'm going to close with this. The number one reason I have seen Agile fail over the last 20 years is people go in and say, we're going to do Scrum, instead of people coming in and saying, hey, I need our people to be more engaged. As a manager, my bonus is being impacted by a low employee NPS score. And so I need our people to be more engaged. And Agile is a way I understand that we can help with employee engagement. Yes, that works, by the way. But if that's the goal, then I focus more on the human side of Agile, and I maybe focus a little less on the technical side of Agile, right? Hey, I need better ability to deliver code. What I'm concerned about is that my lead time on software is 150 days, right? I need to fix my lead time. Great. Let's use some techniques for Agile to solve that problem. When you come in and say, we're going to adopt Scrum because Scrum, that eventually leads to a failure, usually of the form, yeah, I know Scrum says this, but really, do we need to do that? Because nobody has a reason for doing things, right? Hey, we need to have a retro every 2 weeks. Well, do we really need to do that? I mean, it's getting in the way of productivity. Okay, what's our goal? If you can't go back to what's our goal, and the people are inclined to say, oh, you're just a religious Agile fanatic, we don't have to do that, right? If you don't have, here is our goal for doing Agile, I see that cause more Agile failures than any other 2 factors. So I am a proponent of agility as a goal, right? This presentation was about how to achieve agility, not how to follow an Agile framework. And I believe that's how long I was supposed to take, Katrine.
Thank you, Kyle. Does anyone have any questions? Thank you for the very, very insightful presentation. Does anyone have any questions before we close? And if you do have any additional questions, you can email. I'll put the email address in the chat box, and then I'll go ahead and forward these questions to Kyle.
I don't want to keep Katrine, but I'd have more fun talking.
Oh yeah, definitely. If anyone has any questions.
So,
Nice job. I actually, this is Dan here. I do have a question, Kyle, and everyone else. So this is actually a follow-up. I thought I would actually ask at the very end. But I asked about retro and giving opportunities to team members to actually run the session itself or the ceremony. And the reason I asked is because, we're saying about Agile and the goal of Agile, or actually implementing Scrum in an organization, is because you want it needs to be people focused, right? Now, here's my question: is it advisable to do this to give your team members opportunity to run ceremonies, in particular the retrospective, in our goal to foster leadership qualities and engagement among the team members?
My favorite teams have tended to ask, hey, can I run the retro? And if somebody asks, I just say yes. Right? It's pretty much a, hey, who's going to do this? Sorry. I tend to give people the opportunity. The goal, I mean, I spend most of my ceremony time focused on goals. Last time I got to do my translation into Indonesian. I can't do that solo. I focus on the goals, and my general perspective, and I'm sorry, I'm just going to jump to some of my positions. My general perspective is progress. I'm going to try stuff, right? Sometimes it's going to work, sometimes it's not, right? I'm going to be very, very loud about my reasons for what we're doing. And then if the team says, hey, let's try this, I reiterate, here's the goal, and say, okay, let's try it. That's pretty much my whole position on that. And except that if we do something, then after the thing we do, I'm going to say, okay, did it accomplish the goal? Was it an improvement, right? I'm going to actually, if they want to do a retro and they want to do it their way, great. I'm going to retro the retro. Hey, we did this. How did it work? Did it accomplish the goal? Was it better for us, right? And so long as we are chasing the goal, I'm in, right? I am so in for trying things. I don't know. Do you feel like I answered your question?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You did answer my question. It's something new that I'm trying, and I just wasn't sure if I'm shooting.
No, try it. Articulate the goal. Articulate the goal, and you're probably in great shape.
Kyle, following up on that, so an aspect would be when you say articulate the goal. One of the things that trying to allow the team, because it is Scrum teams that I work with, so trying to allow them to become more of a self-organizing team. When you are putting forth the why and trying to educate them, do you try to put it forth and let them figure out and then self-organize to how they're going to go about it? Or do you articulate it to say, we absolutely need to solve this. How are we going to do it when you see certain situations?
So that is a super hard question that cuts to a heart of a lot of stuff. I'm going to switch topics for a minute. I hope my analogies aren't confusing. If I'm a basketball shooting coach on, say, the Spurs, Chip England, right? Do I let people shoot the ball however they want to? I'm going to show them the best practices I know. I'm going to teach us, hey, here's what I'm doing. Here's how I'm doing it. Here's the value that what I'm doing provides us. Can you find a better way to do it? Okay, I'm fine if you're Steph Curry. If you're Steph Curry, I'm going to get the heck out of your way because you make shots like you're inhuman, right? It doesn't work, right? I don't have things to teach you about shots because you're doing it your way and it's better. Until you're doing it better, I'm going to show you, here's my way. And I'm actually going to show you the practice of how I solve the problem, not just the method. Here's my goal, and here's how I've been solving this problem for the last 20 years. Do you want to try something else? Great. Know how to do it my way, and we'll try your way too, right? I'm very happy to try it, right? So long as we recognize that the goal is that this team, the goal of the retro is that the team is aware of where we are and that we get better, right? The goal of the stand-up is that we are synchronized so that we can work together effectively. The goal of the demo is to find out if we're building the right product, right? Every one of the ceremonies has a goal. Let's be really clear about what the goal is. The goal of sprint planning is to have a best guess for how much work we're going to get done in the next couple weeks, right? To focus, well, that's probably not a good, I can say the other goal's tighter, that one's more complicated, right? But if you bring the goal and say, hey, here's how I've been doing it. We're doing this in a one hour meeting because we want this to go fast and smooth. We're doing relative estimation or no estimation because we're trying to solve these problems, right? No estimation is because I just don't trust your estimates anymore. Let's just count stories, right? Each one of the techniques I try, I say, here is a technique, here's the problem it exists to solve. This is an important problem because. If you have a better way to try to solve that problem, I'm happy. If you have a reason to not solve that problem, I'm willing to listen. But I generally tend to think the problem does need a solution. Does that help? Is that close to your question?
Yes, the one nuance, I was the one that also asked about the turnover. So when you get new inexperienced people that are coming in, the nuance to it is, what if you have one person on the team that is a little bit more senior, but is extremely opinionated and often is throwing out the ideas that that's part where I was saying, how much do I interject versus letting the team have the discussion that I think we're going down a wrong path.
I interject because as a coach, sometimes as a Scrum Master, I consider it my job to protect the team, and that includes protecting the team from the hippo.
Okay, thank you.
Right, I've gotten in trouble for that a couple times, but it's a necessary thing as far as I can tell.
Yep, and that's
note, I'm providing advice for agility, not for political happiness.
Yes, and that's exactly what I'm trying to. It's going to cause some disruptions in the short term, but there's also a balance of there's a reason why I'm doing it. If we really want to get over there, but going back to your image, we want to have a little bit less of the disruptions on the path.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Good call, Brian.